pastor of marriage and family at the Covenant Church here in Bemidji. And a little bit about me, because I think even in the introductions, it's important for all of us to know that our story matters because you matter, and a little bit about me that gives some context of why I have such an incredible passion for not only this presentation, but for marriage and all relationships. How do we do that well? So I have been here for 13 years as a pastor of marriage and family. Prior to that, I was a pastor of youth and children's ministry in Fergus Falls for 17 years. And that started at 30, and so before that, I was on the farm. Now, I've been doing connecting with people in the context of marriage for about 37 years. Only my office setting has changed over the years. It started out over the back of a pickup, interacting with neighbors about their marriages. And so it changed from a farmer to a youth pastor, and now I'm a pastor of marriage and family. And I am married for 39 years and have 4 adult children, all married, and 15 grandkids. And actually there's 2 of them at my home right now, so there's a little bit of my heart that is there. 4 of our grandchildren are adopted, and that's just a journey that we never would have ever imagined been a part of our story, and we're delighted in regards to that. So before we get started, let's just bow for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you and praise you that marriage is your idea. And Lord, Father, when we move further away from your plan, it doesn't work. And so Father God, I just pray that you would meet us in this place as we spend time together. And Lord, that we can acknowledge even now our deep need for you. Father, forgive us when we don't. Help us to recognize that there is nothing in life that we can do separate from you. And so, Lord, in some way, there is an element of brokenness in all of our marriages. All of our marriages don't reflect exactly what you want. And so, therefore, Father, we invite you even to this time to help us in our journey with you and in our relationships. Because, Lord, we really want to make love about ourselves. And so, Father, help reveal to us, Lord, where we're the obstacle in terms of what you desire to have happen in our relationships, in marriage. In Jesus' powerful name we pray. Amen. Amen. Well, staying as long is what we're going to talk about. Andy Stanley made this statement: it's so much easier to fall in love than it is to stay in love. And oh, is that so true? And I want to make this statement: truth should always lead us and our feelings follow. When feelings lead, it will always lead to some element of disaster. And so it's so much easier to fall in love. And man, I remember back in kindergarten, I was in love with Vicki. And I strategically looked for her every place on the playground that I could. Only to find out the next day that she was a neighbor of Charlie, and they even rode on the bus together. I was crushed. So it's very easy to fall in love, and the picture that we have of that, if you remember back of what that was like. Falling in love requires a pulse. We all have one. But staying in love requires a plan, and that's where we're going to go today. We're going to create a plan. How do we stay in love? And it's the admittance that it's tough, that it's very, very difficult to stay in love. And we're going to unpack a little bit of what that looks like, and why is it difficult? Because how many of you are here as in professional ministry? You're paid for what you do in the context of ministry. How many of you are paid staff? Okay, just 2 of us. How many of you are in volunteerism in some context in ministry? Okay. And how many of you are here just because you like to be here? You see, there's an assumption made, and it's a very dangerous assumption. And seldom do people ask us when we're invested in ministry how our marriages are doing. And so it's easy for us to do pretend. And to put on the facade, put a lot of energy in giving the illusion that everything is okay. And really not, because in some ways, appropriately delivered, God can use the reality of our brokenness to minister to others, because if we really admit it, we all at some level are broken in the context of our relationships, of which marriage is one of those relationships. Because the natural is selfishness, not giving and caring. So the first value, this is part of now understanding stay in love. And actually, this is in order, I believe. We need to know that we are valued by God. In the absence of that, it leads to all sorts of layers to try to fill voids that will never be filled outside of understanding that. Colossians 1:16. For everything, absolutely everything above and below, visible and invisible, everything God started in Him and finds its purpose in Him. Your value as a person was determined when God chose to create you in your mother's womb. In no circumstances, nothing can change that reality. Nothing. Because you never determined it. God chose you. We need to understand that, because in the absence of that, we try to find it in everything else. Even as pastors. It's much easier to respond to the standing ovation that others are giving you in the context of being the hero in their lives than it is to carry out the to-do list on the refrigerator. And subtly, we're consumed by the joy of meeting the needs of others. Driven by, if we're not understanding this, finding our value in it. Feeling a sense of significance by virtue of what we're doing in other people's lives at the cost of what's closest to us, i.e. our spouse. We need to get this, and if you're in a position of helping others just from friend to friend, this is critical. Our value comes from God, and God alone. There's no possessions, there's no positions, there's no accumulation of anything that will fill this void if we don't get it. Nothing. And I am convinced that this ultimately is why there is up to 160 family units that I visit within my office every year. It is directly connected to this. So every opportunity to meet people in their brokenness has helped them to understand what's foundational. That becomes our ministry, and it becomes a tremendous opportunity to share the gospel. What happens when we don't understand that we are valued by God? I just described that. We make all sorts of attempts to find it in other things that will never satisfy. We need to understand we have the capacity as believers to forget this. It's not only our opportunity to communicate it to those who don't know Jesus, but we need to be reminded of this very thing as believers. It requires knowing that our identity is found in the person of Jesus. Ephesians 1:11, it's in Christ that we find out who we are and what we're living for. Long before he first heard of Christ, we got our hopes up. He had his eye on us, he had designs on us for glorious living. Part of the overall purpose he is working out in everything and everyone. Our identity is found in the person of Jesus. We need to understand that. So what does that mean? Staying in love requires surrendering our life to God every day. And it was a very struggle that David had. He had everything when he was king. And it was kind of like this in my picture. God, I know where you are, and if I need you, I'll let you know because I have everything. And you know, most of you might know the story of Bathsheba. And what happened when David dismissed his need for God. He started to write the picture of what relationships look in his own script, separate of God. And when he understood, Psalm 139, when he understood how much God loved him, coming off of the reality of his brokenness with his choice with Bathsheba, when he was responding to God's love, and this is what his response was. Search me, O God. Know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's anything offensive in me, and lead me to the way of everlasting. This is what needs to happen in our lives. It's part of staying in love. Is our need to daily be reminded of our need to be transparent before God. And we'll hear later as I unpack some other things why this is so incredibly important. Our natural tendencies is to be independent, not dependent. I can do it myself. And my comment to that is, how's that working for you? We can't, and we need to surrender our life to the Lord as believers. because our natural tendency is to try to do it ourselves. And if we go back, subtly, it's to try to find some significance and value in who we are as a person. In the absence of this, it'll lead us to believing that we can do life without God. All of these things that I'm sharing with you have an impact on how we do relationships. And by the way, this is in some ways describing my story. And I have another talk that I do, the contributors to emotional and relational distance in marriage. And these are some of the components of it. When we don't understand that we're valued by God, when we don't surrender our life to God, when we don't know that our significance comes from Jesus, it leads to all sorts of layers of finding it in something else. And we have the capacity of believers to go that direction. Pursuing a relationship with God. Staying in love requires pursuing a relationship with God. Deuteronomy 6:4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And the question that I would pose to you is, what does that look like in day-to-day living? We need to be pursuing a relationship with God on a regular basis. And in the absence of it, it leads to all sorts of layers of emotional, relational distance in marriage. So what does it look like to pursue God? Initiate. Now think about this in marriage. What changes your relationship? When does your spouse realize that they're actually loved? Is when you initiate. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. We need to initiate it. It needs to be more than words. How am I initiating my desire to connect with the heart of God and to build and pursue Him? It's about trusting. Do I really believe that God is enough? Or are there other things that I've come to believe that I need to fill the emptiness in my own heart, the voids? And I think some of what keeps us distanced from God is I'm not sure that we're convinced that He can be ultimately trusted everything in my life. And so then we try to orchestrate finding and filling that emptiness in our own hearts by other stuff. And it's, I think, directly related to our lack of trust in God. So part of pursuing God is initiating, trusting, spending time in the Word. So there's parts of this that just require elements of discipline. But I think the reading of the Word is our spirituality is measured by the amount of time we spend in the Word. It's actually, that's our connection to the heart of God. So it's about relationship, not about obligation. I am not more spiritual by spending more time in the Word. No, it's my connection to the person, the Lord. And I think that changes the motivation. If it becomes obligation and part of your to-do list, it will only remind you of your inability to do it. And so I think what needs a shift, right now I'm leading a men's group and we're unpacking Psalm 119. And if you read Psalm 119, it's talking about David's passion for the Word. But it really is not about his obligation. It's he's realizing that's my connection to God. And he's building a relationship. And so that's sustainable. If we see the reading of the Word as a connection and the building of a relationship and a connection rather than an obligation, it's a game changer. One's driven by guilt, one's driven by passion. I want to connect to the heart of God. And my best way to do that is to spend time in the Word. In praying. Praying is actually acknowledging our need for God. So the fifth that I have, staying in love, requires prayer. Now, I usually spend 6 weeks unpacking all of this, so we've got a short period of time to. So I'm going to be going through this quite rapidly, but hopefully you can create some opportunities just to interact together about questions and thoughts that you have regarding what I'm talking about. Acknowledging your need for God. And you have to ask yourself, do I really need Him? Is that part of what's impacting my marriage? Is that I really can, God, I know you are, and if I need you, I'll let you know. Again, that idea, instead of dependence, independence. 2 Chronicles 16:9, for the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to Him. Part of prayer is desiring God's presence more than His promises. Let me share a little bit about that. I think our natural tendencies is to connect with God because we want Him to fulfill what we want. And now I want you to think about this for a minute. In the context of any relationship, and we're talking about marriage today. How does it work in your relationship if you said to your spouse, really, you are valued for what I can get from you rather than spending time with you? How would that work? It doesn't. Because your spouse feels used, not loved. Now think of that in the context of a relationship with God. I think there are times that we want what He has to give rather than delighting in His presence. And so there's a shift that needs to take place. We need to be honest with ourselves. And do I want to tap into this journey with God because He's going to give me something that I need, as opposed to it is enough and it will meet all of my needs, and I want to sit in His presence and allow Him to transform my life. Now, we could spend a whole block of time engaging in what that might look like. Part of me is, I believe personally, it's the absence of any distraction in order for that to happen. So it's a finding a place where there aren't distractions, meaning that you have to take all your technical things. You have to come to the place where you're okay with not. Part of the barrier in embracing God's presence is believing, having an inflated view of our own significance in the lives of others. I can't leave this phone somewhere else because what if I miss a call? So I think it's our view of ourselves. People need me, so I can't let go of these things. No, you need to embrace God's presence in order to really be the kind of person that your spouse and everybody that you connect to deserves. And so in Fergus Falls, we had kind of a unique property, and it was the back part of our property went around a pond, and on the city land there was a couple huge rocks, and there was ducks and turtles and all sorts of things. And I'd go back to my rock with a notepad and a pen, and sometimes my Bible. And just sat and engaged with God. Never once was that wasted time. And what's interesting about that, when we start to understand this, now God has never spoken to me in an audible voice. Every time I have exercised coming into God's presence, it's put me in the mirror and helped me to realize my deep need for God. And brought me to my knees, recognizing the rhythms of my life as often functioning as though I don't need Him. And not realizing that is one of the primary contributors to relational distance. When you spend time in the presence of God, you recognize your need for Him. And so I think this is not about guilt. It's about love. God loves us. He chose us. He wants a relationship with us that goes beyond just tapping into what He has to give to us. And so is true in our relationship with our spouse. And I think this is the beginning of transforming it. I think this is the beginning of transforming all relationships. Is my acknowledgement that I need to embrace the presence of God and conclude it is enough. And I'm still chipping this away in my own life, by the way. Because I think that the reality is that the more we do something in our sweet spot, in our area of giftedness, I think it raises the tendency for us to not believe that this is important. Well, I meet with all these couples and I know what to say. Who do I think I am to love them the way they deserve to be loved? I don't have a clue who they are. I need God, the depth of who God is, so He can use me to be a voice into other people's lives. And by the way, it's what transforms our marriages. Because I think in the presence of God, it brings us to a place that we recognize where we're selfish and where we're the obstacle to the distance in relationship. I think it's in the presence of God that it starts to transform man and women's natural tendency to blame somebody else. You know, it started with Adam. And do you remember Genesis chapter 3? When God was meandering throughout the garden, and he was engaging Adam, and Adam's comment to God was, it was the woman that you gave me. He had the audacity to blame God. No, we can be quick. We can be quick to say, Adam, come on. I think we need to be careful. There's a natural tendency for all of us that's visited every generation. It's someone else's fault. I dismiss my own personal responsibility in the context of relationships because if Jan was just a different person, things would be much better. And I think it's in the presence of God that we come to grips with that, because every fabric of us wants to get ourselves off the hook. This is where we're not going to spend as much time. Matthew 6, 5 through 15 talks about the improper ways to pray. It's not for attention. It's not to go and talk to others about how much you pray, because it's not about a to-do list. It's not about it's not about impressing people. It's about connecting with the person, the Lord. And it talks about the proper ways to connect with God. We need to establish our priorities. What really matters? We need to determine that together. And by the way, the first few points, I am saying that's what matters. And if that isn't what matters, then the demands are going to take on priority. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of things, isn't there, to say yes to. And a lot of good things. But I think we have to really ask ourselves what ultimately matters in the bigger picture. And I'm here to say the first 5 things are what matter. And that needs to start what drives us in the prioritization of how we live life. It's a shift, and it's a tough one. And part of it for me, I'm so highly relational. It's easy for me to dismiss the value of entering into the presence of God for the sake of meeting someone else's needs. It's what creates passion in my heart, the value of connecting with others. And so this really takes me at the core of the challenge of shifting what really matters. So determine together what really matters. You can determine what you value by what you're willing to make sacrifices for. So you have to look at your life and say, well, what are we making sacrifices for? And does it connect ultimately to what really matters? And some of the shift isn't as impressive to the audience. And I think that's part of the difficulty of the shift, is we want to be recognized for these disciplines by somebody. Is connecting with God enough? People matter more than possessions. Now this could go on to all sorts of things. People is what matters. Your spouse needs to matter. The reason I put possessions, see, if we don't understand that the priority is I'm going to do everything I can to gain them at the cost of relationship. And that's why a majority of people come to my office, wondering why the relationships are falling apart. Is the value is I'm going to sacrifice everything to gain more, to have enough money to buy more stuff, to be able to do more things. And the cost I'm saying is too high, because you're dismissing the need, and what really matters is people. See, and here's another thing. We're talking about relationships. You matter. Are you dismissing your own need to fill your own tank, and what's the cost? Because ultimately what God wants a relationship with us to help remind, we need Him to fill our own tanks. And I think we dismiss that in the striving to accumulate, to get more stuff. Oh, there's so much we could talk about, and we will here. I don't know what time is it. No to, and what you're going to say yes to. This is so convicting to me. It is hard for me to say no to anybody. And then added to that, saying no without an explanation. By the way, I'm just going to a little side note. When you start explaining your no's to other people, you're going to lose every time. Because when you explain your no's, someone is going to have a different idea and an explanation, and they're going to conclude, well, why wasn't I of value to you? You're giving them the power to discern if your no is valid or not. You will lose. And this was the hardest shift for me because I'm a people pleaser. I want everybody to like me. So I had built all these big cases of how to explain why I'm saying no, when in reality all of them are giving the power to someone else to discern whether that no is valid. We need to identify our own selfishness. It's going to get, it just gets harder. That's why there's a list here at the beginning, from 1 through 5, is so incredibly important. We need to identify our own selfishness. Here's a question that I ask. Now, most of these things come out of the context of relationship. One of the questions I ask over and over again is, how do you believe, if an individual comes into my office struggling in the context of a relationship, or in marriage, or whatever it is, I ask them this question. I want you to think through, how am I contributing to the very reason that I'm in Doug's office? How am I contributing to the distance that I'm experiencing in my relationship with my spouse? It was interesting. I had met both with this couple several times, and the wife came into my office and basically was looking for me to say it was okay for her to start pursuing a divorce. And we interacted, and again, this is in the context of relationship. She knew me, both of her husband and her knew that I cared for them deeply. And I asked her, what do you think, how have you contributed to the very reason that you're wanting to get a divorce? When she left my office, she said this: I believe I'm the primary reason of what's created distance in my marriage. And I just thought, wow, that's not something that I could do in her heart. God showed up in a way that convicted her heart, and it was directly related to identifying her own selfishness. Do nothing out of selfishness and selfish ambition or vain conceit. How am I contributing to the unhealthiness or the distance that I feel in my marriage? Our natural tendency is to say it's the other person's fault. Not to say, where am I being selfish? For the first 4 years of my marriage, I tried to change Jan to be like me. The more you get to know me, you would come to the conclusion that we're glad there's only one of you. So I could ask you ladies, how would you have felt if you were married to me, if you felt that you were my project? Not well. So here are some examples of selfishness. Unhealthy competition. Am I more concerned about winning arguments than I am about resolving conflicts? Anyone can win an argument, but you will lose what you need and want the most, the relationship. Isn't that interesting? How quickly our ego gets in the way and we'll give up the very thing that we need the most because God created us for relationship. And winning becomes more important than the connection and the reconciliation between husband and wife. Correcting and advice giving. Do I spend more time correcting and giving advice than I do providing focused attention and empathetic listening? Jan just can't wait for my profound advice. She gets up every morning saying, man, I can't wait for Doug to share another bit of truth with the wisdom in his heart. That was a little sarcastic, by the way. Listening well helps you understand if your thoughts and perspectives are even desired. Isn't that interesting? We assume that the other person wants to hear from us. How about this idea? How about asking him, would you like me to respond to what you just shared? I do it often in my office. Do you know why? And you go, Doug, they're coming to your office for your advice. No, I want them to know that I respect them. Because it's respect that builds relationship. So when people share, the response is, when your spouse is sharing, don't assume. And see, here's what can help you develop empathetic listening. Don't assume that they want your response. What's the problem when you don't get that? You're thinking about how you're going to respond while they're talking. Now they bust you because you haven't paid attention. And your response is not connecting to the dots of actually what they need. And so empathetic listening helps you to discern, do they even want my perspective? And then before you respond, you ask them, would you like me to respond, or would you like me to just sit here and listen? Would you like me to hug you? Would you like me to leave the room? It's all about respect. And I think that's a powerful way to model that you do. And maybe that's part of the problem. I don't. You're going to be a better person if you just spend more time listening to all the profound things I have to say to you. Wow. That's arrogance. And it creates relational distance. Interrupting. Oh, I have the gift of it, by the way. Do I interrupt more than I ask thoughtful questions? A thoughtful question sends the message to the other person that they matter. Interrupting says, what I have to say matters more to me than you. We grew up in a family where we did rude really well. If you wanted a word in edgewise, you just increased your volume.
Yes, we did.
This is my brother, by the way.
So that would interject and interrupt.
And so you just the volume is louder and louder. It doesn't work in relationship with your spouse. And we don't realize again that when we're interrupting, this is the message that we're conveying. what I have to say matters more than you do. Ouch. That hurts. Use of free time. Wow, this is a big one. I want to decide for myself how I'll spend my free time. No one else is going to tell me what I can and can't do. It starts to become about power and control. This was huge in the first part of my marriage. I would come, and for all of us, you're thinking as you're working, you're just kind of figuring in your mind what you need and how you're going to spend your time, and you got it all mapped out. And then when you come home, you become more of an informer of what you've already decided, rather than say, what was your thought today, dear, in regards to how you wanted to spend free time? Would it include me or not? It's a shift. Because I think that what we fear is that this is going to give permission for our spouse to control us. And I won't get what I want. I won't be able to do what I want to do. Actually, your spouse might like spending time with you. And maybe you'll discover that they're less interested in controlling you and more about sharing together how you can spend your free time. Some of it might include her or him, and the other part might be they're privileged to say, wow, I'd rather not spend time with you tonight, and not seeing that as a rejection, but rather just this opportunity to decide together. That's about building a relationship. Not about power and control. Decision making. I don't want to include anyone in the process of making decisions. I want the freedom of decision making and my spouse's stamp of approval and support. Jan, this is what I've decided to do. Now please make me feel good, because it's not going to include you, but I want you to affirm me that I made a great decision. And then if she doesn't, then I go away pouting. And adults have a tremendous ability of different forms and looks of pouting, by the way. I've developed many of those. Stomping of feet, slamming doors, deep sighs, eye rolls, and the list goes on and on. And so it's, when you start looking at this and really hearing what it does, isn't it repulsive? But I think I see it as a reoccurrence happening over and over again. Please make me feel good about a decision that I've already made, even though I have not included you in the process. And we formulate in our mind what we want that to look like, by the way, too. We become irritable if we don't receive it. Valuing others above yourself. How are we doing in relationship to time? What, does someone have the time?
44.
Okay. And we need to be done at what time? 55, I think. 11:55. Okay. Valuing others above yourself. Philippians 2, verse 3b. Rather, in humility of mind, value others above yourself. I'm thinking of how that looks. Does your spouse know that you value them? Here's how they might know that. You include them. Decide together how you spend your free time. Look for ways to compromise and flex. This is how they will know that they're valued. You initiate sharing with your spouse what's on your mind. Change of plans, ideas you're considering. So this can happen throughout the day. Give your spouse a call and say, here's kind of what's going on in my mind. Why don't you work on those things, and when we get home, let's talk about it. So your spouse will know that they're valued when you include them, when you initiate, and you ask, how would you enjoy spending time together? Because it's all about building a relationship, not about getting your own way. Because part of being in the presence of God is God will confront us and help us to reveal our own selfishness and in our, I just lost my train of thought. Our resistance to include. Seek the other person's perspective. Jan, what do you think about these thoughts? And treat your spouse like they really matter. Include them in the process of decision making. No one likes to feel invisible. Take interest in the things that are of interest to others. Philippians 2:4, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. Let me give you an example. I, having been a former farmer, love working with dirt. And love landscaping and gardening and just things that are measurable and I just like doing it. And so I have different routines in the spring, getting the gardens ready and weeding them. And we always have a pile of dirt because I'm replenishing the gardens with good soil. And so I'll get all excited after I'll get a couple gardens all looking nice. I'll come into the house and, Jan, you gotta come out and see. I like show and tell. And so she'll come out, and basically what I'm wanting her to do is ooh and ah over the moving of dirt. It's really what it is. And she does. And what's powerful about this is, do you think that Jan is really excited about moving the dirt? No. She's excited about it. And she knows that that's how she can connect to my heart. And my heart is filled because she takes interest in the moving of dirt. So let me flip this. Jan is a masterful quilter. She's an artist. And she does her art giftedness through the expression of quilting. So oftentimes she'll have 4 or 5 projects going on all the time, and she does a lot of her own designing. And right now she's got 2 quilts that, we've got 2 adopted boys who are 5 weeks apart, who are 1 year old, and she's making each of them a quilt. And it took her a long time to start envisioning what this looks like. Now she's come up with a theme, and it's just incredible. The 2 boys are little bears, and they're the biggest on the quilt. And their sister, who's older, is a rabbit, and the parents are little squirrels. And there's a bonfire and a tent and a pine tree. It's just amazing. So I'll come down to the family room and sit on the floor, and I said, Jan, tell me where you're at, what your head is doing, and look at these different quilts. Do you think I'll ever be a quilter? Do you think Jan wants me to be a quilter? No. Because it's not about the quilts. It's about connecting to the person. But that's the connection to her heart. We need to get this, and we could spend time sharing stories of what that means to you, but we need to get the biblical principle. We take interest in things that we're not interested in. And here's where I see it in the context of parenting. So often parents will want to shape their kids to be fishermen, when maybe they're a writer. Just connected to a young student here last week. He has already written a novel, 8th grader, and he's feeling isolated and alone, and he will probably be publishing and making lots of money as a publisher, and now is trying to figure out how to fit into the scheme of life. How could I connect to his heart? I invited him in my office, and we talked about writing. Because it's not about the novel that he's wrote. It's about a connection to his heart. And so we need to understand this in all relationships, and especially in marriage. Take interest in what you're not interested in. I don't want to. I want Jan to like hunting. She'll never like hunting. She takes interest in my stories about hunting. Following Jesus' example. Philippians 2:5-6. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in the appearance of man, and humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. So here's Jesus' example. Jesus built relationships by helping when it wasn't convenient. And I say this over and over again in parenting, but the same thing is in marriage. Seldom is loving someone genuinely convenient. I remember Brendan, our oldest, we required our kids to let us know when they came home from a date or when they were out. Some of our greatest conversations was at our children sitting at the foot of our bed at midnight, and I had to be up at 6 o'clock next morning. It's not about our convenience. It's about connecting in a relationship. Giving when it hurts. Devoting energy to the welfare of others. This is just how Jesus built relationships. Serving others. Shifting from the mentality, what's in it for me, to how can I help? What does love require of me? We've got 3 minutes. Let's talk. What's this triggered for you? Questions, comments?
I really appreciate your comments about connecting with the heart, finding common ground, building relationships from there. So I think in all relationships, not just in marriage.
Right.
That's God's design for us to connect with His heart. We talk about that desire of His presence, connecting with the heart of God, and connecting with our heart. And that really sets space for our marriage and our children.
Right.
Every child is different, and every grandchild is different. What is the need? Look past the differences. Find a way to connect. Because when we connect and we build that relationship, we build that trust, that's when eventually we'll be able to speak into that person's life.
I think it's the only way to.
People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Right.
Appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you. Other thoughts or comments? Questions?
I'm kind of like you. I'm definitely a people pleaser that can't say no. And it's just a healthy reminder too that I can't say no directly, but every time I say yes to one or other thing, I'm saying no to my spouse. And it's just a reminder of that really saying no a lot. And a reminder of what should be put, that people pleaser thing could be really great in marriage if you remember to apply that to your spouse first.
All of our strengths have an ugly side too. The desire to accommodate also can create some obligation and problems in a marriage. And I think that people pleasers have a hard time saying no. And I think that this was a shift in my marriage, is giving Jan, I use a day timer for my organizing my schedule. I allow her to speak into my day timer. So what does that mean? If I'm going to do something over and above my regular routine, I will, if you call me to ask me to speak someplace, I'd say, sounds like a great opportunity, I'll get back to you. Well, to get back to you, I immediately go home, sit down with Jan, and have Jan say, take a look at my calendar. Because she knows my natural tendency to say yes to everything. She knows that. And she actually cares about me, by the way. Isn't that interesting? So it's not just that she wants to spend time with me. She actually likes me to have enough energy to be a cheerful presence when we're together, rather than an exhausted one. And it's less driven by her and more about, Doug, why don't you take care of yourself? People pleasers will dismiss their own needs for the sake of pleasing others. My mother was an artist at it, to her physical detriment. And so I think what I do then is I say, Jan, here's the opportunity. Understand, she already knows that I want to say yes. It's not this little boy coming to her mother looking for permission. It's no, Jan, what's your thoughts regarding this opportunity related to what my calendar looks like? And in this particular situation, she said, Doug, what are you going to say no to if you say yes to this? And so we talk about it. And that's fair. Because she's looking at it, I'm including her. Now, what's the statement in relationship when I do that? Jan, you matter enough to me that I will include you into my life in this way. No, I believe that you're not trying to control me. You actually love me and want me to feel good in terms of my own well-being, and it will impact our relationship. It just has. Because you've invited me in. And it was 4 years of resistance to do that. Because you know what my fear was? She's going to control me. She's going to tell me what to do, and I want to make my decisions myself. Isn't that ugly? And in the presence of God, He starts to reveal those things. And starts to transform our lives. And we need to be intentional about it, because we're naturally selfish. Any other? I've got a whole presentation of people pleasing. My name is Doug Giese, and I'm a recovering people pleaser. I know. Any other thoughts or comments?
I like,
Go ahead.
I like it very much because in our marriage we're walking through this, and I realize how patient my wife is with me, because she knows that I like road construction. So as soon as it comes up this spring, I'll have to see what everybody's doing, and she'll go with me. And while I look at all the equipment and see who's doing what.
She's taking interest in what you're interested in.
Yeah. Even if it's road construction, we're sitting at barricades.
Because it's not about the road construction, and that's what we don't get.
Yeah.
She actually loves you. She likes spending time with you. Isn't that amazing?
Praise God.
Great, absolutely. Other thoughts or comments?
I appreciate that you're sharing that we don't have to justify our no's with people, that we can just leave it as a straight no. Because that's something I struggle with. I feel like if I can't give a good reason for this no, they're not going to understand it. They'll be angry with me because I'm a people pleaser as well. So just leave it at no is okay.
Yeah.
And it's even help.
And a people pleaser will scream that it's absolutely rude not to explain your things. I am just being rude. No, you're not. You're not giving them the power to discern that your decision was not the good decision. No, because they're not thinking about you. Go ahead.
I'm not married, but so I kind of flip this, maybe staying in love with Jesus, a lot of us get home, maybe I should just ask him what he's interested in more, and you know what I mean, and if he's having what's going on with him today,
And to live in the anticipation, how is that going to shift the way I think and the way I live? That's pretty exciting.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, let's pray. Stop. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for giving us guidance and direction. We're not given these expectations without instruction and left to flounder. More so, Lord, help us to realize our need to shift into desire being in your presence. I think that's the beginning, Father, of life change, relationship change. Thank you for each person that's gathered here. Lord, help us to be a light with the gospel in other people's lives when we start to get it ourselves, and especially in our marriage, because that was the best way to reveal who you are, this marriage. So, Father, help us to live out your desire. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.